To prove a case of fraud, it needs to be proven that there was a deception and it caused harm, damage, or loss to a victim. To dismiss a case as not fraudulent, it needs to be proven that there wasn't a deception and there was no harm, damage, or loss caused to a victim. So this is part 2 of talking about fraud. In the first video I made a couple days ago, I've actually studied the concept of fraud even more since that first video, which the video was still valid. And I was demonstrating the 9 points of fraud using an AI chatbot, Mistral, in DuckDuckGo, showing how you can expose the legal name by understanding fraud. I was just using the 9 standard legal elements of fraud that the chatbot provided me, but a couple days after, or the past few days, because it's the 26th of June today, 2025, I decided I wanted to understand it even more, and I kept looking, I kept thinking, using this chatbot as a really useful tool and just questioning and hammering down, and I'll come up with stuff myself and say, what do you think about that? Are there any redundancies here? Is there anything superfluous here in what I'm saying? And I'd question the AI's point of view about, which all it's doing is just it's pulling information from the standard legal practices, and it's telling me this is just what the standard legal practices are doing. It's a useful tool. And I'd say materiality, for example, the concept of materiality, like prove to me it's actually useful. Like why should materiality be present as an element always in fraud cases? Like prove to me. And it was having a hard time. I just wasn't buying, and I thought it was actually a point of fraud in of itself because just the chatbot wasn't explaining it properly. And then eventually I was like, oh, I get it. It could have explained it in such an easier way. So that's why with these chatbots, sometimes you have to be careful because they can just be shit. Sometimes they're just wrong. So you're always using discernment. Obviously, like when you're reading an article off the internet, or you're speaking to a friend or listening to an expert or any authority, always you must use your own intelligence and discernment. Always. So I want to go over the 14 points of fraud that I've established at this point now that are always present. There are some additional things which can be present, but what I was trying to do was build a case and really figure out for myself, like, what is fraud always? What makes up fraud? If I was trying to look at any case, whether it's someone who sold me a dodgy car or a reincarnation soul trap or the legal name fraud or a 2020 fine, whatever it was, I want to figure out how can you tell if this is fraud and what's not. I've gone into much greater depth compared to the last video. I'm going to share a few explanations of what fraud is and then go into the 14 points. So this is about the legal name and the birth certificate fraud there. What's happened there with the legal name is that the trick is they deceived you into voluntarily changing your status, which then altered your obligations and liabilities, which made people think they have to pay tax and fines and all that kind of stuff, when in reality, none of that legislation is applicable to our true status, which I've explained in other videos. You can find more information on that. I'm not getting too bogged down on what that is, just fraud today. Fraud is where one gains by deceiving a victim, causing a loss. It's convincing someone to do something that they would not do if not deceived. In that, it's not always. So that's not the always point there. That's most cases of fraud. But sometimes some fraud cases, like say identity theft, is different. If I steal your driver's license or ID card or your bank card and I start doing stuff with it, you didn't consent to that at all. It's still a violation of consent, but there was no pseudo approval garnering of consent, which is different. We'll go into that more soon. So fraud, it's creating a situation where the deceiver convinces the victim that they have something that they want or need. You need to buy this car, or you want to buy this car. Yeah, it's good for you. Or this house, or this stock, or this market investment opportunity, or this birth certificate, whatever it is. The deceiver is convincing the victim that they should have it, that they want it. And it is doing it in a way where it's beneficial to the fraudster, the deceiver, but it's actually detrimental to the victim. That's why a deception is necessary. That's why it's fraud. Because the deceiver knows if the victim knew the full picture, they wouldn't agree to the terms and conditions. It's a use of a trick which violates the golden rule of equity for the deceiver to gain at the victim's expense. It's a violation of a duty to inform the other party of negatives that may reasonably impact their decision. Okay, this is the most important part of the video right now. I'm going to go over the list of 14 aspects, elements, characteristics of fraud, and then I'll be explaining in more detail what I mean by that, how fraud is always these elements. So 1, deception. 2, intentional scienter. 3, concealment. 4, misrepresentation. 5, violation of consent. 6, it is unethical gain. 7, harm, damage or loss. 8, victim. 9, equity violation. 10, exploitation. 11, rational disclosure, or a lack of it. 12, justifiable reliance. 13, responsible causation. And 14, significance. So I'll go and explain those in more detail right now. And so they are different to the 9 elements I shared in the previous video, because those 9 elements were the standard legal systems elements. I've modified that, and at this point in time, I think my version is better. But I may be mistaken. If you think so, I'd be happy for you to point it out. So number 1, fraud is always a deception. Fraud is a trick. In simple terms, a deception is a trick. And I just asked this chatbot, tell me what are the types of deception? And it's come up with a big list. And this is one way that these things you have to be careful with, or they're just stupid. They're just stupid. They're still not that useful. Because for instance, it said disinformation and misinformation, but it's listed it twice. It's like 9 and 10, misinformation, disinformation. And then it's also said 19 and 20, misinformation, disinformation. It's like repeated, doubled itself up. And then it's got lies, and then it's got black lies. It's like, okay. It's also added in white and grey lies. You can see there's some differences between white, black and grey lies. Okay, we'll see what it says, but it can be useful. Anyway, so because there's lots. What is deception? There's so many different forms of deception. There's lying, direct out lying. And you might notice I didn't add in there, because fraud doesn't always involve lying. Lying isn't always present in fraud. It can be, but not always. There is omission, which can lead to deception, equivocation, which is using ambiguous language or avoiding commitment or using jargon, especially legal jargon, confusing language. And we know the legal system is the absolute pinnacle of jargon and deliberately over complex language. You have understatement, falsification, impersonation, gaslighting, misinformation, disinformation, plagiarism, bait and switch. Yeah, that's true, that is a type of deception. Okay, phishing, scamming, white lies, black lies, grey lies. There's some big ones here. Concealment. Actually, it hasn't even got misrepresentation. Because when it comes to deception, I'd say, well, definitely misrepresentation, concealment, and then probably lying. Really, they're the 3 biggest factors of deception. Because I mean, things like omission, sure, but that is covered under the basis of concealment. Because when you're concealing something, there is always an omission. So 2, fraud is always intentional scienter. So there's always the intent to deceive. So it's intentional to do that. That's why there is concealment and misrepresentation, which comes later on. But scienter means knowingly doing something wrong. You know that what you're doing is wrong and you shouldn't be doing it. Well, not necessarily that you shouldn't be doing it, because the people who do it think, some categories as well, probably the Jews, they think they have the legal and legitimate lawful right to deceive people who aren't them. That is a common idea that those people, or even just some people, who cares if they're Jews or not, some people believe they have the right to deceive others, but they know that they're doing something wrong. They just don't care. So intentional scienter. So, and to say it simply, it's like, I deliberately tricked you and knew what I was doing was wrong. 3, fraud always contains concealment. So concealment is information that's hidden or not shared, something that hasn't been said. If you're buying a car from me and you say, hey, is the car good? And I say, this is the best car I've ever had. And you're like, cool, I'll buy it. Simplifying it. But I neglect to tell you that the brakes are worn out, right? There's concealment. That's something I know and I should tell you because that's important. And then you buy the car from me, you drive away in it and you go through an intersection and you crash into a car because the brakes aren't working. So because I frauded you, that was concealment, you see? That's a very simple example of concealment. Information is not shared. So fraud always contains misrepresentation, a pretense that something is what it isn't. That's what misrepresentation is. It's like if you come to me and I'm an investment broker or something, and I tell you this is a low risk, high return stock, but it's not, it's the opposite. It's high risk, low return. There was a pretense, so I pretended that this stock was better than it was. I was pretending it was something that it wasn't. I presented like this illusion. Or you're coming into my motorbike shop and I say, this motorbike is super powerful, it's really fast, it's super powerful, and it's a Pee-wee 50 or something, and you know nothing about bikes or anything. It's a 300cc, but it performs like a Pee-wee 50. So you were deceived. I pretended something which just wasn't true. So there was a misrepresentation. And so with the legal name, there's a misrepresentation. Well, first there's a concealment. Information that isn't shared is, hey, you don't need to do this. And it's really not in your best interest to do this. I'm not saying that too much because that more comes into point 11. So concealment is just, there's information that is not shared. And really that's due to like an informational asymmetry. But I haven't put that as an always point because that's not absolutely necessary, because in any deal there's always information asymmetry, meaning I know something that you don't, but it needs to be more specific in that, because I may know a lot about Roman history and you don't. So there's information asymmetry there. So it's not specific enough, whereas concealment and misrepresentation of specific material facts, that is far more specific about particular knowledge that is relevant to the significance that influenced your decision to buy something or to get a birth certificate. So the misrepresentation is that you are your legal name. There's no distinction, that they're not separate things, that a legal name in all capital letters is the same thing. Or there's a misrepresentation that a government is a legitimate body, that there is such thing as an objectively good and useful and beneficial government, when it's just not true, it's not the case. The people at the top, they know that. 5, fraud is always a violation of consent. In simple terms, I manipulated your consent in a way you would not have agreed to if not deceived. So there's always a violation of consent. If you had known the facts, you would have said no. No, you wouldn't have consented. Even if I steal your ID and I'm not actually getting your consent and I use your bank card, if you had known what was actually happening, you would have said, no, I don't approve of that. You don't have my permission. I don't approve of that. You don't have consent. Whereas in a normal transaction, a deal is you come to my boot camp center, here, my boot camp is $600, and you say, yes, okay, here's $600, we'll make the trade. I train you for 8 weeks in a challenge, where you knew all the details, you consented, it was a fair trade, no remorse, you weren't hurt, etc. Where there's a whole fraud here. If I said it was $600, and then at the end of it I said, oh, there's actually another $600. And then you say, hold on, you didn't tell me that. And I say, well, I didn't need to tell you that, or whatever. Then there's something fraudulent happening there. 6, fraud is always for the deceiver to gain unethically. So whether it's identity theft or someone selling a car or the birth certificate fraud or whatever it is, it's for whoever is the architect, the orchestrator of the deception. They're trying to gain something that they couldn't have without the deception, without the violation of consent. They want to gain something they know they can't get another way. If I'm selling a car and I have it listed on the marketplace for months that it's at 100,000 kilometers and no one wants to buy it. So I go, well, I'm going to roll it back to 20,000 Ks because then I'll be able to sell it then. What I've done is I wanted to gain, but I wanted to gain unethically. I wanted to get your consent to buy the car by deceiving you. Because if you had known it was 100,000 Ks, you wouldn't have bought it. But at 20,000 Ks, I've deceived you into voluntarily providing that consent, because I didn't need to hold a gun to your head or threaten you to buy the car. I just deceived you. I rolled the odometer back from 100 to 20,000 Ks for unethical gain. And it's unethical because it's a violation of the golden rule of equity. It's misrepresentation. It's concealing the facts. Well, that's an outright lie. Oh, yeah, it's only done 20,000 Ks. To gain unethically, you can say it this way. I want to gain from you in a way I know you would not agree to if you knew the facts. 7. Fraud always involves some kind of loss or damage to a or multiple victims. And they need to be victims of specific identity. I'm putting that in there because it can't just be the public in general, because the chatbot kept on saying that insider trading was fraud, and it couldn't convince me. I kept on arguing about that. I was like, that's not fraud, insider trading. I mean, the chatbot couldn't convince me. It didn't have a good enough argument. Maybe you, the viewer, have a better argument for why insider trading is fraud, but I thought it was just too ambiguous. There's no specific victim. It's all the market in general was affected by this fraud, by this insider trading. I'm like, you can't say that the market in general was affected. You need to have a specific victim. Oh, the public at large. There is no public at large. The public at large is made up of me, you. If you want to be called the public, I don't want to be called a member of the public, but you know what I'm saying in this context. This person, all with specific identities. So when there's fraud, there needs to be someone who is affected, who has an identity. Not just the public at large or the market, people in general, this race, this species. No, it needs to be someone of a specific identity. And this is where I think the legal system gets it wrong, because they say, well, it is fraudulent for insider trading because the market gets affected. And I come in here and I say, that's not objective. That's not objective enough, because that's a violation of the law of identity. The market itself, the public itself, doesn't have an identity. You can't have some kind of objective law based upon non-objective standards. It's incoherent, inaccurate to do something like that. And until I hear an argument to prove me wrong, that's my stance on insider trading being fraud. But you could call it something else, insider trading. Do I think it's a crime? I still don't think it's a crime. I haven't seen an argument to prove it's a crime. And even if I that could show that it's a crime, I still don't see how it can be fraudulent. Not at this point, though I'm open to being proven wrong about that. So continuing on with point 7, I was mainly just focused on victims need a specific identity. But there also has to be loss, harm, or damage. You can call harm injury as well. So someone needs to be hurt, whether physically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. Now that could get a bit iffy about the technicalities of spiritually, theoretically. Generally just stick to physically, emotionally. Emotionally could kind of just be psychological as well, intellectually, mentally. Needs to be some kind of harm or injury to someone's body, mind, or a loss. Like they lost money, or they lost an identity, or they lost something in some kind of personal private property. Or damage. Something was damaged that's not their body, so their property was damaged. Their car was damaged, or their home was damaged, or something else. So harm, loss, damage to a specific victim. Essentially, to say it simply, you're hurt by the fraud. If no one was hurt by the fraud, it's not really a fraud. 9. Fraud is always a violation of the golden rule of equity, meaning the person who is frauding someone else would not want to be on the receiving end of that fraud. They would not want to buy a car which had a difference in the odometer from 100 to 20. No one wants to be tricked like that. For any cases of fraud, the golden rule of equity is just so fantastic. I made up that concept. All that means is treat others as you wish to be treated. Don't do things to other people you don't want done to yourself. Really, it's so simple. With the golden rule of equity, why I've added that in there is because it makes the fraud more impactful, more weighty. It has more gravity. It's a more serious crime because you've got that intentional scienter there, knowingly doing something wrong, and you're knowingly doing something wrong, especially when you know you wouldn't want to be the victim. So it makes it more serious, which demands more serious punishment. Or in my case, I would say rehab, which would be the punishment. Rehabilitation, lock someone up, rehab them, teach them how that's the wrong thing until they get that through their heads and never do it again. And then if they did get out of the rehab center or did do it again, well then that's the time for punishment. So number 10, fraud is always an exploitation of vulnerabilities. So that's exploitation. To say it simply is, I saw an opportunity or a weakness and I took advantage of it. Or just I wanted to take something from you because I could. I wanted to have what you have, your money, your power, your status, your energy, whatever it is. I saw an opportunity. I wanted to take from you. I knew you wouldn't like it. I knew you wouldn't let me do it if I told you the truth. But I saw a weakness. I saw a vulnerability and I took what I could. That's always present in fraud. In any kind of case, there's always an exploitation of a vulnerability, which again increases the significance, just the weight, the gravity, I like those words, the gravity of the magnitude of the crime. This makes it more immoral, more evil, a nasty thing to do. 11 is fraud is always void of rational disclosure. To say that simply, I had the ability and responsibility / duty to tell you the relevant facts, but I chose not to. Saying, I know if I was in your position, I would want to have been disclosed the relevant facts. If I was the one buying the car, I would want to be told that the odometer is rolled back, or the brakes aren't working, or the house that you're buying has a termite infestation, or the structure is cracking, or that this stock is a very risky investment, or that a birth certificate is going to come with all these obligations and liabilities that are just completely unnecessary, unwarranted, unjustifiable, subjective, immoral, evil, etc. There is a rational disclosure. That is, fraud is always void of a rational disclosure because the other party has the ability to inform. In every case, whether it's identity theft, the houses, the cars, the stock markets, the birth certificate, even incarnating into the world, whatever it is, the fraudster has the ability plus the responsibility and duty to inform the victim, but they don't do it. That's what makes the fraud even worse, more of an evil thing. Because they had the power to tell you, this car's brakes aren't working. And it's also knowing that this is going to cause harm, or has even the potential to cause harm. They might not know for certain. They might think, this stock is pretty good, but I don't know for sure. Let's sell it, because I'm going to make a good commission from this. And they could say, I didn't know for sure that it was going to cause harm, that they lost all this money, or whatever it is. And so from the point of the government and the legal system, the legal name, there is a total void of rational disclosure. They have the ability and the power, the responsibility and the duty to inform us of the distinction, the separation between a legal name and a real name. And everything else that comes with that, voting and tax, etc., but they don't do it. They don't do it. And even if they do it, even if they try to argue, oh, it's all well documented, they don't do it in a way that's reasonable. It's not rational to do it in that manner and expect people to understand the consequences of what having a legal name mean. What's going to happen from that? It's irrational to expect people, as I explained in part 1, to expect people to study for 30 plus years to understand these enormously complex topics. That is irrational, inexcusable. Number 12. Fraud always involves the victim justifiably relying on the fraudster. So when your parents get the birth certificate, because I'll say right now, what's cool about that is we weren't involved in the birth certificate fraud because we were just a baby. We didn't agree to get the birth certificate. That's always the parents involved, which is good for us because it gives us an extra degree of separation. If you do get a Medicare card or license or anything else after that, well, okay, you are part of the fraud, but still you've been frauded, which essentially null and voids any of those contracts because they're unethical contracts. Like in my other video, 9 points of an ethical contract, I explain those points and how they fit into fraud. Well, I'm explaining now how points of a contract fit into fraud. And so when you're young, dumb, ignorant, and don't know anything under the age of 18, well, we justifiably relied on the government as an entity we could trust. Oh, we actually need a driver's license. We need to pay this much per year for registration. We need to pay taxes and fines. We have to. That's just what we have to do. And we justifiably relied on that system. And they didn't disclose that it was completely unnecessary and that we don't have to do it because they're bad guys. So they're not going to do that. Fuss the fraud. Because good guys don't do that. So obviously they have to be bad guys. Obviously. So, and the parents, they don't know what's going on with the legal name. They don't study that. So they justifiably relied on the nurse or the doctor, whoever was the staff member telling them, hey, you need to get a birth certificate. It's good, trust us, do it, blah, blah, blah. There's this justifiable reliance. And those people are also frauded as well because they've been deceived, whether it's a nurse or the doctor or the person working at Vic Roads or at the ATO, at the taxation departments or in government. They're all deceived at some point to some level. Some of them are more like completely deceived, the lower down you go. Some of them are less deceived, that have a better understanding of what's going on. But for the legal name fraud, that goes all the way back to the top, the people who fully know what's going on and who are causing all this down the chain, and they're just using these people, the police and the nurses and the doctors as lackeys, as tools, right? Those people have been deceived and therefore they're deceiving us on an even lower level in the hierarchy beneath them. And so, but ultimate causation and responsibility goes all the way up the hierarchy to the Callow King, or whoever's at the top. Callow King is just a name I use for the head of the cabal, the people that actually invented this fraud. And maybe they're dead because they did it a long time ago, so it's still the people who are at the very top still enacting and empowering this system. They're all still responsible. So there's this justifiable reliance. And even when you're buying a car, yes, I justifiably relied on you selling me the car to tell me the truth and to impart any relevant, crucial facts that would affect my decision not to buy it. Especially if it's going to cause harm, damage, or loss. Like if the engine's about to blow up and that's going to cost me a lot of money, or the brakes, or if it's something like the windscreen wiper is getting a bit old and maybe not even that. So it's something really simple, then you don't necessarily have a duty to tell absolutely everything because that's not leading to some kind of significant harm, loss or damage. If it's a tiny little detail that maybe you forgot, well, if you forgot, that's okay. But if you intentionally left that out, it's very nuanced and contextual. It depends on the significance of the misrepresentation or the concealment, on whether it's classified as fraud or not. So fraud is always when the deceiver is responsible and is the cause of the harm or loss or damage to the victim. In essence, I tricked you and was the cause of your loss or injury, making me responsible. I tricked you, or I was the cause of your damage or loss, because if I just steal your identity theft, there's no tricking happening. Oh, there can be tricking that happens, but not all the time. And also, to make it simple for the justifiable alliance, basically, to say it in a child's way, is I thought I could trust you, but you betrayed me. I thought I could trust you buying this car, buying this house, this stock market, using the birth certificate, getting a license. I thought I could trust you, but you breached my trust. You betrayed me. You stabbed me in the back. You did something to me that I would not do to you, and you would not want done to you. So, again, it adds more gravity to what fraud is about. And whenever there's a breach of trust and a betrayal, it always causes emotional harm. So again, that just adds to the gravity. This thing's a bloody hypothetical, bloody black hole. Now, how much gravity there is in this thing. Not that I believe in black holes. Well, that's up for debate. A lot of things can be considered black holes. Moving back to this. Fraud is always a... Actually, hold on. No, I want to elaborate on the responsibility and the cause. Because, for example, I could cause harm to someone walking down the street, boom, I knock them over. Oh, no, I'd still be responsible then as well. Yeah, that's different because I caused it, but it wasn't intentional. Because you can be the cause of harm or loss, but you didn't mean to do it. Like, that's manslaughter, that's different. I could cause... For instance, the nurse who convinces your parents to get the birth certificate, they're the cause, but are they fully responsible? Not really, because they didn't know what they're doing. Sure, they still had a responsibility to try and learn what they were doing, but because it's the legal name, that's extremely, extremely complex. But then when you look at police, for example, say, whenever they pull you over, basically anything that the police do, most of what the police do, let me say that, not almost anything. Most is just another way of saying almost anything. Not everything they do, but most of what the police do, they are the cause of the harm, whether they're just pulling you over when they have no right to do that, they're still causing harm, they're fining you, arresting you, 2020, all that shit that was happening there. They are the cause, but the responsibility is further up from whoever gave them the orders. But still, the police are still responsible for their immoral actions because they should have thought, hold on, is this right? Should I be doing that? I'm not just protecting the innocent here. They're not protecting the innocent at all. They're the ones violating and attacking the innocent. Wear a mask, otherwise you'll get fined. Otherwise we'll arrest you and lock you up. That's attacking the innocent. Sure, there were false pretenses about etc., but they still had a responsibility to investigate those statements to see if they were true, and they failed. So they're not fully responsible for as much as whoever fabricated the lie and gave them the orders, but they're still responsible because they could have figured that out. It wasn't that complex to figure out, hold on, we're the bad guys. We're attacking people on the streets in protesters, and we're just literally being full bad guys, attacking dads in front of their kids. I saw that firsthand. Oh, attacking me, that happened multiple times. Forget about that. Whereas you compare that to the nurse at the hospital getting a birth certificate, well, there's a lot less responsibility, even though she still is she is a cause, but is she the ultimate cause? Well, no. She's a causal factor. You could phrase it in that way, a causal factor, where in the legal name there's a whole chain of people who are causal factors, and I think they are all part of the crime, and therefore should all receive some kind of punishment, even the nurse all the way at the bottom. Even though she knew not what she was doing, there still needs to be some kind of punishment, and my version of punishment is rehab. They need to be rehabilitated, they need to be taken out of their position, their role of causing harm, damage and loss to people, and they need to be fixed. Obviously, this is not going to happen in the real world. I'm just talking about hypothetically. theoretically, objectively, what should happen and what is the right thing to solve this problem. This is not going to happen. Earth is not the place where justice is served. This is Earth. But we can still talk about what justice is, what objectivity is, and logic and reason, and what fraud actually is and isn't, and how the legal name is fraud and the government is fraudulent, etc. We can talk about that and discuss that. Can we fix anything here? No, I don't think so, but it's besides the point. It doesn't matter. So I've just put it into responsible causation because for situations of fraud, it adds extra weight. People who commit fraud are the cause of the fraud. So whenever you're trying to prove a case of fraud, you need to show that their lie or misrepresentation or concealment, so their deception, I don't know why I put inverted commas, but their deception was what caused the harm, loss, or damage. I need an acronym for that. HDL, harm, damage, or loss. It's like HDL cholesterol. Yeah, HDL. Okay, cut that out. But when you add the responsibility there, it's another nuanced difference that they're responsible too. They didn't just cause it, but they're responsible. They're accountable. Now they're culpable. They're held liable, obligated to do something to remedy the situation which they had part in causing. 14. Fraud is always a deception which is significant enough to alter or influence the victim's behaviour if they had known the truth. So I call this significance. The legal system calls this materiality. I change it to significance because that's all materiality means in the legal definition's point of view. They don't mean material as in a physical hard fact or solid substance or something like that. They're using it in the manner of meaning important or significant. I was like, well, I'll just change it to mean significant. It's more accurate. It's not a mislabeled word that you need to first understand the definition of to get it. You see what I mean? It's just extra unnecessary complexity. Make it more simple. It's just significance. And the chatbot was having a hell of a time convincing me that this was relevant until I finally figured out, oh, it's really simple. It just means if I'd known the truth, I wouldn't have done it. Here's some examples. If I'm selling a TV and I advertise it as 40 inches, but it's actually 39.5 inches, right? So, and even say I did that intentionally, well, it doesn't really cause any harm, damage, or loss to you. It's not big enough of a deal. It's half an inch difference. It's not significant because if you'd known the truth, you're like, oh, that TV is actually 39.5 inches, not 40. You're probably still going to do it. Like say if you're buying it online and you can't see it, you probably still would have gone, okay, I'll still get that deal. It's not a big enough factor to influence your decision. Or if the car had been rolled back from 100,000 to 98,000, it's only 2,000 Ks different. If you'd known the truth, you probably still would have said, okay, I'll still do it. You may have bargained for a couple $100 cheaper on the car, but it's not going to influence your decision. Whereas if it's 100 to 20,000 Ks, yeah, you would. If the TV says 40 inch but arrives and it's 30 inches or even 35 inches, you go, wow, that's such a big difference. It's a significant difference. I wouldn't have proceeded with that. With the birth certificate, if the parents knew the consequences of getting a birth certificate and all the liabilities and obligations that come along with it, they probably would have said, well, you know what? No, I'm not getting this, or now I know how to use it in a manner where I'm not, or my children, is not specifically liable. And the legal name can get charged and they do whatever magic on the back end to charge the legal name for fines and tax and all that, but you as the individual don't have any money that leaves your bank account. So significance is an important factor that always is in fraud cases. And it's what the courts look at as well. When they're looking at, if you've got heaps, hundreds of cases, you go, okay, well, is there any harm, damage, or loss to a victim? That's the primary thing you need to look at. If there's no harm, damage or loss and you're looking at a fraud case, you go, well, there's no fraud here. There's no harm, damage or loss. So you just dismiss it. There's nothing going on, from what I understand at this point. But also if you say, yes, there was, you're like, oh, you read into it and you're like, okay, what about the significance? And you look and you see, oh, it's such a tiny thing. You sold a car and it was classified as blue, but it's actually navy blue. Or you said it's navy blue, but it's actually a slightly different type of blue. It's just a tiny little insignificant detail that's changed. I mean, you could talk about that topic for a long time. How do you define what is significant and what's not? It's meant to be according to a reasonable person. Well, what's a reasonable person? So this is just, again, a basic overview, and I don't want to study this forever. I just want to know this to a fairly well level, better than most people, so I can recognize frauds and prevent myself from being frauded in times I've been frauded in the past and prevent frauds in the future. So that's all. Oh no, there is a bit more I'm going to do today. An additional way to think about fraud, they're not additional points, but they're just different ways to say what I already said with, say, misrepresentation, and they sound cool. For example, fraud is an obfuscation of reality and material facts. It's like the relevant facts of the matter are hidden and not obviously known. And even say with the identity theft before, because if I'm using identity and someone's cards and all that stuff, I'm also tricking someone else. It may not be you being tricked right then, or you could be losing money from your bank account or something else is happening to you, but also someone else is being a victim in that identity theft situation. But come back here, fraud is a presentation of a false visage. A false visage is being presented. This car is actually 20,000, not 100,000. This birth certificate is what you must have, and it's good for you, it's beneficial, it's useful, it's in your best interests. This stock is the best when it's actually not. This house is the greatest when it's not. It's 2,000 square meters when it's only 1,500 square meters. There's a false visage, a false pretense, a pretending of what is not true to be true. A false reality is presented as if it is true. Just another way to think about it. Yeah, there's always an omission, which is in concealment. And they can involve manipulation, but not always, because manipulation is something specific and different to deception. It can involve a lie, not always a lie, but a lie is always part of what deception is. Fraud is always a deception, but it's not always a lie. But it's always, as I said, there's a concealment and a misrepresentation. Another way to look at fraud, not always, but sometimes, it's the garnering of pseudo-approval. The garnering of pseudo-approval or pseudo-consent. Garnering means like the collection of. It's the gaining of consent in the car sale, the house, the stocks, the birth certificate. It's a gaining of consent, but it's a pseudo-consent because if you knew the true facts, you wouldn't have consented. It's a pseudo-approval or permission. Perhaps not so much permission. Sometimes it could be permission. But a pseudo-approval. Yes, I approve of the state of this car. I approve of the fact you're telling me and I'm justifiably relying upon you to tell me it's 20,000 Ks, not 100,000. That this birth certificate is moral, there's good, there's no downside to it, there's only upsides, it's in my best interest. I have to do it as well. If you're telling me I can't not do it, I mean, that comes into manipulation. And so I want to point out a few elements of legal name manipulation, or just manipulation in general. So what people can do is they pose as a trusted representative. And so with the government, that's what they do. They pretend to be trustworthy, to be the good guys. I mean, even in a car sale, they can do that as well, or anyone can do that in any kind of fraud. There's guilt tripping, which can happen. And say in the legal name, if you don't do this, then your child won't be able to travel overseas. They won't be able to do this. They won't be able to do that. There's this feeling of guilt associated with it if you don't obey and comply, if you don't do what everyone else is doing, which is a social conformity tactic. Everyone does this. Don't be like an individual. You must do that. This is what the herd is doing, the crowd is doing. Follow the social proofing. So it's a social proof conformity, peer pressure kind of tactic. Everyone's taking a smoke. Everyone's using drugs. You should use it too. Warning of penalties, like scare tactics. Oh, if you don't get this birth certificate, if you don't do that, you might get fined, you might get in trouble. If you drive away here without a license, there's all these problems that are going to happen from that. So there's scare tactics involved. So what I'm saying is there can be. Not everyone's situation getting the birth certificate involved this, but I've heard cases where this has been present, or with people who have gone into hospital and for a broken leg or some problem, and the doctors are trying to get at that, and hopefully you're watching and not just listening, so you saw what I did. And there's all this fear-mongering, scare tactics to pressure them into getting that. And that's manipulative. Peer pressure, just general pressure. It doesn't have to be peer pressure, but pressuring. It could even be physical pressure, putting a hand on the body like that, trying to be reassuring, but it's not. It's pressuring. Outcast, shaming, a sense of urgency. We haven't got time. Could be distraction. Oh, I've got all these other things to do. You need to make up your mind right now and you need to do this. This is what everyone does. It'll be so terrible if you didn't do this. You feel guilty, shame, outrage. They could get angry at you. They could be outraged and anger at your disobedience. What? You need to get this. You need to get the birth certificate. You need to get this. Oh my goodness. So it's more manipulation. And there can be like sympathy and a false appeal to empathy. Oh, I understand. I knew someone who was like you and they were really struggling and trying to disengage from the system, and then they just needed to go see a good psychologist and that helped them. They were incarcerated into a mental health hospital for a while and they got better, and then they got the birth certificate and their life was so much better. They just needed the right medications. It's all manipulative tactics. They're trying to appeal to your sympathy and empathy and all this stuff. So there's confusion due to complexity. So the legal system is perfect, super complex, but even a car salesman might make situations which are so complex that just confuse you. And so then you just end up buying. I mean, you could make a whole video just about that. I probably wouldn't be qualified, but I could. Just confusion and complexity. It's actually, that's a powerful tactic that the cabal use. Just have a look at the US presidencies. They use confusion tactics. They have Trump and then they have Biden and then they have Trump again. So they have someone who is apparently orderly, Trump, which are totally not, but then they bring in someone completely dementia-ridden and chaotic, who's just an actor pretending to be that. It's no one. And it creates all this confusion. And then they say, oh, there's at least this guy, Trump again, who's at least half sane. He can at least remember his name and dress himself, maybe, in the morning. So they use this confusion it's just as a manipulative tactic. Oh man, you can go into so much more detail there. Complexity, jargon. Say with the legal system, there's jargon, there's all these words you've never heard of, like materiality, what the hell was that? And that would just go on forever, constantly. What's this word? How they've structured, like the difference. They say you're living in Australia, in America, in the state of Victoria, in Queensland. It's like, no, you're not in it, you're on it. There's a big difference between in and on. I don't see a roof over the country. And so just little stuff like that, which just changes so many other things down the line. There's just this complexity. There's all this jargon of different words and using legal words. Person, it's got these different definitions. Understand different definitions. And then there's the immensity of it, not just the complexity of the language and just the complexity itself, but it's so big, so enormous with the legal system, deliberately. How many thousands and millions of pieces of legislation or pages or words to read? It's just too big to be good. That's the way you can put it. It's just too big to be good. Distraction, as I said, there's isolation, so they may pull the mum who's in a vulnerable position as well, just given birth, pull her away or isolate the dad, get the dad out of the room, and so it's just the mum, oh yeah, come on, you're in this vulnerable position, sign these documents for the birth certificate. I've heard of that stuff happening. And then there's also gaslighting, so making the victim question their own perceptions, memories, or understanding of events or interpretation of reality. Gaslighting, so there's so many different methods of manipulation. But again, fraud doesn't have to have manipulation, but this fraud of the legal name, I think most of the time it definitely does. But again, you need to use your discernment and look at which aspect. Are you looking at a fine you were issued, or a GST, or a council tax, or a rates, or vehicle registration, or the birth certificate itself, or what a capital gains tax, and you need to use a discernment and apply this to the context. If you were trying to write a letter, or you're going to court, or you're dealing with police, maybe you just want to know this stuff for your own personal enjoyment. And really, it's a self-defense skill if you ever need to use it. You can learn it now and then always come back to it in the future. All right, so that is the end of the video.